Right, when the conversation is vulnerable,
Yeah.
it can really build connection and really build sexual tension. And it can make the genitalia feel safe to come out and play.
Hi, I'm Emily.
Hey, I'm Percy.
There are a lot of YouTube channels with dating coaches who talk about when should you have sex when you're dating somebody new. And they don't really say exactly when is the right emotional time. They do talk about, yes, when it's feeling right, but it should never be on the first date or second date or even the third date. They give artificial time frames, like a month or two, or when you have the commitment question or exclusivity question. Yeah. And it's so confusing. So in this video, we're gonna be talking about the right way to determine when is the right time to have sex.
So there's always like a formula that people use like in their head, like, okay, once this person says I love you, or like, you know, just like,
yeah,
or like in two weeks if we're dating twice a week, but if we're dating 3 times a week, then it should be. So it's a head-based formula. Sex is an emotional process. It's an emotional, you know, biological, spiritual, it has all these levels to it. It's not a process that happens in your head, so it's hard to use very concrete, head-oriented guidelines about how and when to have sex.
So what is the guideline, Percy?
What is the guideline?
What do you use as a guideline? Since I'm newer, so just so you know, we don't date each other. We're great friends, but we have separate dating lives, and then we bring our experiences to our friendship. We talk about these things and we make the videos.
Yeah. And it's a fun
really
process. Yeah, it does. Yeah. What is sex? How do you see sex? I think when Emily talks about this question with me, I don't tend to have a problem with that as far as when to have sex, because I'm not thinking about sex as an objective to get to. I think about sex as a process that is happening throughout the entire process, throughout the entire dating process.
When you say sex is happening, are you speaking of penis and vagina sex or oral sex? What are we talking about? Are we talking about emotional foreplay where we're sexting?
Sexual connection, sexual energy is there from the very beginning.
Otherwise you wouldn't be dating in the first place, right?
Otherwise you wouldn't be dating.
Yeah.
It's the process that created you and me. So it's always here to some degree. Sex is always happening to some degree everywhere. So it's a very basic fundamental aspect of reality. There is a spark of energy.
Sexual tension.
Of sexual energy. Of sexual energy.
And you're
from the moment you say hi.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's enjoyable.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Right? So that there is some degree of that hopefully happening at all times. The question is, okay, that's sex happening from the beginning. It's a spectrum, right? So the spectrum's like smiling at someone and saying hello and feeling that sexual energy between two people is part of the sexual process. Without that, penis and vagina would never happen. Right?
I love the way you put that, yeah.
Right, so it's an entire spectrum, and sex is happening to some degree at every part of the dating process.
So here is the conundrum though, especially when you're online dating trying to like fish for a human. It's like, it's not online dating, it's online fishing. Let's see which fish is actually like kosher. Maybe it's a majority of the people, maybe it's half the people. You have to know what your purpose is. My purpose in dating is to find a long-term relationship. Whether or not it's ever gonna happen with regards to marriage, that's up in the air. But I would like to have a long-term spiritual partnership at the highest level of attraction. That's beautiful. For me. So I am not out there looking for hookups. Right. And a lot of profiles say I'm not here looking for a hookup. Now, if you're looking for a hookup and you go on a site like Tinder, which is known for hookups, fine. You meet somebody, their sexual attraction. That's just... Well,
can I pause you right there? Sure. Because the spectrum that you're talking about just proves that sex is not the culmination of the spectrum, right? So you have smiling at someone and saying hi,
right,
or seeing someone's picture and saying, okay, this person's interesting. There is a little bit of sexual energy in that, because that's the interest. It can go from there to kissing, to making out, to making love. right? Your spectrum doesn't end at making love. It's also about, you know, commitment. Can get into a really deep, you know, really deep spiritual bond. You know, could go all the way to marriage and beyond, you know, who knows?
Right.
So that whole sexual spectrum, you know, sex is somewhere around here. The spectrum is huge as far as where sexual energy can go.
And that's what we're not able to tease out in the dating process, because some of the videos by other dating coaches are saying you got to tease out the men from the boys. The boys are out to get the sex. They're not really into a relationship or emotional connection. And some of these boys say what they need to say in order to get into your pants. And that, for a long-term relationship-minded woman, is very difficult to tease out. And that's why I believe that the other dating coaches are saying, do not have sex early on, because your chances of even getting into a relationship with the guy are so slim. That's why you got to hold the cookie back and make sure that there are these deeper layers of connection.
You just really said hold the cookie back, didn't you?
Oh, the cookie of penis and vagina.
Right. Oh, wow.
So it's like, you know, have the appetizers, but then so then the question is appetizers. Before you give them the final cookie, what can you actually do before you ruin the whole thing? And that's what's hard. That's what's hard to determine. Like, you know, we made that other video where the boundaries, fears, and desires video, where I thought there was some sort of connection, and then I get dumped after intimacy. I don't want that to happen again.
I think the spectrum that we're talking about is connection, sexual connection, and sex, penis, and vagina is a small part of that connection.
Right, I agree.
If we're looking at it, what you want is a level of connection that feels secure, like this is not going anywhere.
Yes, exactly, that I'm not going to be dumped, that I'm not just a hookup.
Right. So, excellent. So let's talk about how that connection actually comes to be.
Okay.
And I'll talk about it in terms of IFS, and we'll...
Internal family systems.
Internal family systems.
The parts way of looking at things.
Great. So people are systems of parts, just like cars have parts, just like bodies have parts, brains also have parts, personalities have parts. You have one person's personality and another person's personality. You smile and say hello, you know, this is, you know, one part, just a social part, but it's just like, okay, there's a little bit of a connection there. That's great. It's a weak connection. You know, you can walk away and say something different and no big deal. You know, if this, you know, bond breaks, you know, who cares? It's easy to break that one bond. Okay. But let's say you get into something, an interesting conversation. Oh, so, you know, what do you do for work? You know, not that that's the first conversation everyone would want to get into, but, you know, so you have a bond there. There's something, at least in common, or something that this part likes about this part and this part likes about this part, and there's a bond of attraction there, right? Yeah. You know, you can get into other things. You know, what sorts of things do you like to do in the bedroom? This would not be the third topic of conversation. Well, it might be, depending on where you are. But yeah, okay, you have a bond there. You know, you have kind of an emotional, you know, sense of, you know, this person is sad about something, this person is sad about the same thing, and there's a bond that forms there. What's your family like? You know, you have a connection and commonalities about family. And it's not always commonalities, but it's being able to relate, being able to understand. Once you have all of these different bonds and topics and places that you've connected, we've done this, you know, activity together. We've worked on this particular topic together. This person has helped me with their homework, for example, and I've helped them with theirs. You know, so you have all these experiences, all of these parts that have been connected. You have intellectual, emotional, sometimes, you know, physical, holding hands. Okay, we both enjoyed that. Goodness gracious, if you were to break all these bonds, I would miss this person. Like, this would not feel good after I've created all these bonds and all of these parts are connected to all of their parts. And by the way, you know, these, you know, all of these parts can form cross bonds too. So this is the total of attachment that you have with the person. And this is something that is palpable. You can feel this level of connection with the person. You know, genitalia are also here. It's just like, okay, well, these you know, genitalia, and these are very emotional, you know, vulnerable places of ourselves. This genitalia is connected to
oxytocin.
Like oxytocin,
Yeah.
but you know, the very vulnerable, like infantile places in us are
Yes.
connected to our genitalia.
Yes.
They're vulnerable. Once we have all of this, and this is feeling safe, and you can only really feel this. Like you can say, okay, we've talked about this, we've logically talked about this, but that doesn't mean that there's a connection there.
Oh.
Right? The connection is felt. It's palpable. So
it's like felt through the heart.
Right. Felt through
instead
the
of
heart.
Through the head.
It's felt in the body. Connection is felt in the body. You feel connection in your gut. You feel it in your heart. You feel it in your throat. You feel it in places along the front of your body, typically.
Well, it's I think it's breathing together. Or even when you're receiving a kiss, if you're not breathing into the experience and you're just doing it to do the kiss, but your heart is not in it, you may have done the kissing.
Right. We've done the kissing.
It's not a
thing.
heart-led connection.
Right. So there's a difference between exchanging information.
Yes.
And feeling connection. But it is the exchange of energy that builds connection.
So if there was a boy instead of a man that talked his way through to a woman that wants a long-term relationship, the woman doesn't know that this is actually somebody that's only looking for the sex and for the hookup, then when the sexual encounter happens, it would be more disconnected.
That's true. There's a certain level of vulnerability. Like you'll get to the exile parts.
Which is the inner child parts.
The inner child parts, right? So the vulnerable parts, I mean, the conversation that we talked about with, you know, boundaries, fears, and desires. I will write it in another way.
Boundaries, BFD.
BFD. So we're talking about boundaries and fears and desires. Like, boundaries are vulnerable. You have to be willing to put something out there, to give a boundary, to state a fear, to really be vulnerable about your desires. These are vulnerable places inside of you, and you're sharing those. In my world, if you can have a conversation about that, and by the way, you know, if someone is saying that their boundaries are like, I want to have a relationship, and the other person isn't necessarily able to say the same thing, or isn't able to say the same thing to the point where you can feel it.
Feel it, yeah.
Right? Then it's like, okay, this is not a connection that's bridged. Right? So you don't have that, and it doesn't feel as safe. It's the somatic feeling of the relationship that really helps people to know, okay, this is whether I feel safe, this is whether I can trust this person, this is whether we have a bond, and these bonds are just as chemical as they are spiritual, just as they are biological. Like, it's a palpable thing. It's a felt sense.
We'll link the video that we did on boundary, fears, and desires, and you'll watch Percy as he's demonstrating for me how he has the boundary, fears, and desires conversation. He created a lot of sexual tension in that conversation in and of itself.
Yeah.
That was so hot.
Right. When the conversation is vulnerable,
yeah,
it does really build. It can really build connection and really build sexual tension. And it can make the genitalia feel safe to come out and play. And so you build that. You build that connection as well. But there's more connection that comes after the genitalia. It's not like this is the height of the connection. You know, you have, you know, like commitment and stuff like that gets discussed and that gets formed between people. That happens oftentimes beyond the sex. So there are deeper levels. I would say vulnerability is the key to that, to opening up, and curiosity about the other person and their parts.
Now that you just described this in this way, I'm going to keep this story very generic.
Sure.
A friend of mine who found someone on a dating app, the woman was very forthcoming in her emotional parts because she was well versed in the parts language. And this friend of mine, I had been, as a friend, just helping him through some of his relationship challenges over the last 6 months. And he had risen up to this level of understanding parts. And so when they connected, it was fast and furious in terms of emotional connection. So all of these circles, it happened within the first week. It was just daily, constant communication via text and phone calls. And then they went on a date, and then after the date, there was more connection via text and phone calls and sexting. And so that level of vulnerability was so there. The woman actually opened up the vulnerabilities. And then he was a spiritual warrior that was ready to receive all of that because he was at a point in his life where that's what he was looking for. And that's what he attracted.
Right.
And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, how did this work? They had like full-on sex on the second date. And they're still continuing to see each other. Nobody dumped anybody. And they're all in.
That is really cool. You can never know. It's for each couple to determine, because a lot of times there are kind of, let's see, we'll go here and we can, but a lot of times you can have surface parts that are connecting.
Surface parts.
Right. So you can have surface parts that are just like, oh my
gosh.
Like,
what do you do for work?
We have all this stuff in common.
Yeah, our childhood was like this. We struggle with this. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and it's then, right. And then it's just like, okay, let's get the genitalia involved. But
let's get the genitalia. Okay.
Right? Let's get these parts involved too in our relationship. It's great when you have the places that are vulnerable, the places that we often hide. When they get involved, it takes a lot to bring these parts in. I'm just saying this to be sure that people aren't mistaking the story that you're talking about, where there's real vulnerability.
There was real vulnerability.
Right.
I happened to be, I was being kept abreast of what was going on because I was just so fascinated, and because I had met somebody around the same time, and it wasn't going as fast because that other person, that wasn't really on his agenda. But these two people were ready for a long-term relationship. Right. So the vulnerable parts came out.
Vulnerable parts are there. And probably, I mean, if you're able to say, hey, this part over here,
what part is that?
Doesn't really like this part over here.
Oh, okay.
So there are situations where it's like, oh my gosh, this person is so awesome, and everything's great. In that level where everything is great, it's like, okay, well, let's find some of these parts that I might not want to see in this person.
And when you open up the space to ask the other person to not judge or criticize the part and not get rid of the part. Like in the other video that I did where I was smothered with sexual energy on a first date, I didn't feel that this other person was actually holding space for that part of me. And that's why the dynamic was a little awkward. And then we had talked it out a few days later after you and I had processed that.
That's an example of exactly what I'm talking about. Because the example is you giving this person quote unquote negative feedback. All feedback, if it's, is just feedback. It can be a good thing. But when you say, hey, this part didn't strike me in the right way. What did you mean by that?
Yeah.
And then those are kind of the vulnerable situations where you can have, okay, these parts have a negative interaction and they can work things out.
Which is what happened. Yeah. No, which is a beautiful thing that happened because this other person was able to receive the feedback, based on what you had shared, and it just made so much sense.
Right.
And that it could correct the situation.
Right.
And build the intimacy that's needed to accelerate getting physically intimate.
Absolutely. And that reminds me of the beauty of, and the key of rupture, rupture and repair. If you're able to have a ruptured bond, like, okay, this wasn't a good interaction, can we talk this out and rebuild it? Because when you rebuild it, it rebuilds it stronger.
There's no coming to consciousness without pain. That's that famous Swiss psychologist Carl Jung quote. So in order to build intimacy, emotional intimacy in a relationship, it all depends on how you rupture and repair.
Right.
And I know,
there you go.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people are afraid of conflict because they don't know how to do conflict from a self-led place. We have other videos that show how to have a conscious communication. But that's the key, and this is why we have this channel, to show you how to rupture and repair from a self-led place so that all your parts can connect in such a beautiful way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's, can we sum it up and just...
Yeah. In conclusion, I'm sorry, I don't have a formula. I don't have a, I don't have a 3 month, 3 month step-by-step, or a 2 week step-by-step, or some channels, okay, how to get her into bed tonight. I don't have that.
Yeah, that's...
But, we're talking about the total safety and the total sense of felt connection. And there's a process about how that connection builds, and it's building through a variety of different parts connecting. And vulnerability is required to get that sense of variety of connection. And also rupture and repair is required to have the strength of that connection. And in that sense, there's a place where the body, if you learn to feel that connection in your body, the body will know when this is right. And it's not within a week, it's not within a month, and it's not a certain period of time. It's a certain amount of felt connection.
This is also where if you do end up in a little hiccup in the beginning, like I had done with this other person, it can actually accelerate building of the emotional bond. Because if everything is rainbows and unicorns for 3 months, you're not going to know what's really going to happen when the you-know-what hits the fan.
Right.
So if you could do this early and witness that the other person can hold space for resolving conflict, that they could actually hear what you have to say, then you could be building a beautiful thing.
Right.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, when should you have sex? There is no cut and dry answer. It's about how vulnerable are you and the other person willing to get to know all the parts of who you are. And this is part of the fear that a lot of people have. So they don't build this connection. They go straight into the sex, and you wonder, well, why did he or she ghost me?
Right. And I would say, biggest thing in this, boundaries, fears, desires, I'd say if you can talk about those 3 things, it will be very helpful in determining whether this is right or what level of sexual connection is right for that connection.
Okay, so hopefully you learned a few things, and if you like what you learned here, subscribe, comment, and share. And until next time, see you later.
Take care.